They call it success story. They don't know the cost. Her words built me up. Then they tore me down. Now, the hardest lesson is peace. I've been wanting to tell you this for a long time, because for years it lived in my chest like a knot I couldn't untie. On paper, it sounds like one of those cliché stories. Broke guy, ambitious girlfriend, heartbreak, glow up, karma. But when it's your life, it doesn't feel cinematic. It feels like watching yourself drown in slow motion while convincing everyone else you're just taking a long swim. My name's Daniel. I'm 34 now, living in Austin, Texas, working as a software engineer and co-founder of a mid-sized startup you've probably never heard of unless you care about boring logistics tech. People see the car, the condo downtown, the articles on LinkedIn where they call me a self-made success story, and they think they know how I got here. But none of those articles mention Rachel. None of them talk about the nights I stared at the ceiling and believed every terrible thing she said about me. None of them say that the first time I really felt rich was the day I realized I no longer wanted what she'd taken away. I met Rachel when I was 24. She was the kind of beautiful that made you straighten your posture without meaning to. Dark hair, bright green eyes, the kind of smile that always looked like she was in on a secret. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party, one of those backyard things with Christmas lights hung badly and cheap beer in a tub. I was the quiet guy near the grill, talking about some app idea with a friend who mostly nodded out of politeness. She walked up, listened for maybe 20 seconds, then said, "So you're the dreamer in the group, huh?" I laughed, a little embarrassed. "I write code," I said. "Dreaming doesn't compile." She liked that answer. Or at least she pretended to. We spent the rest of the night talking. She worked in marketing, just got hired at some mid-level agency downtown. Everything about her felt polished: her clothes, her Instagram, the way she told stories. Standing next to her, I felt like an unfinished draft. I was freelancing at the time, taking whatever small contracts I could get, building websites for restaurants and ugly internal tools for small companies that didn't want to hire a full-time dev. My bank account lived between $300 and $800 like it had signed a lease there. Rachel loved the idea of potential. That's what I figured out later. In the beginning, it looked like support. She told me she believed in me, that I was so smart and so different from other guys. She'd brag about my ideas to friends, even draw out future plans. "When your app blows up," she'd say, tracing shapes on my arm, "we'll move out of this city. Maybe California. I'll help you build the brand. We'll be a power couple." It sounded like a dream. I didn't question the small digs slipped between compliments. When she laughed at my car and called it endearingly tragic, I laughed too. When she teased me for double-checking the bill, I told myself she just didn't grow up worrying about overdraft fees. When she rolled her eyes at my Walmart furniture and said, "One day you'll have real adult stuff," I thought it was motivation, not judgment. If you've never been the broke but promising guy dating someone who's already halfway up a ladder, you might not understand how quickly you start shaping your sense of worth around how impressed they are. Every freelance gig became proof I wasn't a waste of her time. Every small setback felt like I was personally letting her down. I stopped talking about how nervous I was, how unstable everything felt, because Rachel liked confidence. She liked headlines. "My boyfriend's building his own startup," played better than "My boyfriend is trying to keep the lights on." About a year in, I got serious about an idea I'd been circling for a while: local inventory management for small businesses. Not sexy, but necessary. A friend from college, Marco, wanted in. We wrote up a basic prototype, pitched it to a couple of angel investors we found through startup meetups. We got one bite, small but real, enough for 3 people to barely pay rent and work on the product full-time for a year. Rachel told everyone we were funded. It made me uncomfortable, but I let it slide. I moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and turned the living room into an office. Marco and I lived on takeout and cheap coffee. We pulled all-nighters until my eyes burned and my wrists ached. Rachel would come over in pencil skirts and heels after client meetings, looking like she belonged in a different world. At first, she tried to be supportive. She'd bring groceries sometimes, or snap behind-the-scenes photos for social media. But as the months dragged and the app wasn't blowing up, her tone shifted. The questions turned sharp. "So, when is this going to start paying off?" she asked one night, picking at her salad while I inhaled leftover Chinese food at my tiny kitchen table. We're close to landing a pilot client, I said. This stuff takes time. Yeah, but other people your age are already there, she said, tilting her head in that way that meant she was pretending to be gentle. I just don't want you to get stuck in this hobby mindset. It wasn't a hobby. It was 16-hour days, panic, and hope. But I heard what she was really saying. Her patience had a clock on it. I started hiding the bad news. When a potential client backed out after months of discussion, I told her they decided to wait. Like it was a scheduling issue, not a rejection. When one of our small investors told us we needed to show more traction before they'd consider another check, I spun it as they want to see our numbers before they help us scale. Every spin chipped away at me because I knew she liked confident stories, not messy realities. The first real crack wasn't spectacular. It was a Tuesday. I'd forgotten our dinner reservation because a bug in the software was causing inventory counts to randomly reset, and I lost track of time. My phone died. By the time I got to the restaurant, almost an hour late, she was sitting at the bar, dressed too glamorous for the casual place. Martini half finished, expression cold. Hey, I'm so sorry, I started. There was don't, she said, holding up a hand. It's always something with you. A bug, a client, an investor. When do I get to be the priority? I tried to explain, but once Rachel decided a narrative, it was reality. That night she told me calmly, like she was reading from a script, that she felt like she was dating an idea, not a man. Those words burrowed deep. I started waking up with them already in my head. The distance grew from there. Little things that used to make her smile now made her sigh. I'd send her screenshots of new features. She'd reply hours later with a heart emoji and nothing else. I asked if she wanted to come to a pitch event, and she said, "Those things are so boring, babe. Call me after." But she didn't pick up when I called. I got her voicemail, that cheerful recorded version of her that didn't match the woman who now flinched when I reached for her hand in public. The night everything really broke, it was raining. Of course it was raining. Problems love dramatics. We'd been invited to a party at one of her coworkers' apartments, some high-rise downtown with a view that made my whole childhood feel small. The place was full of people who seemed born wearing blazers and confidence, holding drinks that cost more than my weekly groceries. Rachel fit right in. I stuck close to her, laughing when I was supposed to, nodding when some guy named Trevor talked about quarterly goals like the fate of the world depended on them. At some point I lost sight of her. It wasn't a big place, but people spilled onto the balcony and clustered in the kitchen. I checked the bathroom, the hallway, the little balcony off the bedroom. That's where I found her. She was standing too close to her boss, Drew. I recognized him from her stories. The brilliant creative director who really got her vision. They were laughing about something I couldn't hear over the music. His hand touched her waist, briefly, like testing a boundary he already knew didn't exist. She didn't move away. If anything, she leaned in. I froze. It wasn't what they were doing, exactly. It was the way she looked at him. I'd seen that look. I'd once thought it belonged to me. I didn't confront them right there. I backed away, heart pounding in my throat. I stood in the kitchen, staring at a bowl of chips, feeling like the floor had tilted 20 degrees. When she finally found me, she was flushed and bright-eyed. "There you are," she said, looping her arm through mine. "I thought you Irish goodbyed me." I asked her, later, after two mutual friends had dragged us into group photos, and Drew had clapped me on the back, calling me the genius boyfriend. I asked if anything was going on. She laughed in my face. "Are you serious?" she said. "Drew? He's my boss. Do you have any idea how paranoid you sound?" It wasn't just the denial. It was the disdain in her voice. Like I was beneath even being reassured. "I saw him touch you," I said softly. "You didn't move away." She scoffed. "You're literally jealous of a 2-second touch. Maybe if you spent half as much energy building a stable life as you do inventing problems, we wouldn't be having this conversation." That line gutted me. Because the thing about being deeply insecure is you're always ready to agree with the person hurting you. I went home that night and looked at the mess of code on my screen and thought, maybe she's right. Maybe I am just a guy with ideas who never lands anything. Over the next few months, she became a litany of comparisons. Melissa's boyfriend just made partner. Can you imagine? They're planning a trip to Europe to celebrate. I just feel like I'm always paying for things. It'd be nice to be taken care of for once. Other guys my age are buying houses. I'm still walking into your apartment and tripping over extension cords and pizza boxes. She wasn't wrong about the extension cords or the clutter, but there's a way to say, hey, we need a better setup. That doesn't sound like you're a failure, I'm stuck babysitting. She chose the latter every single time. When our biggest pilot client backed out, right on the edge of signing a real contract, I didn't tell her for a week. I carried it alone, like an anvil on my chest. When I finally confessed, she didn't even look surprised. Of course, she said, scrolling through her phone. This is what I've been trying to tell you, Daniel. You gamble everything on unproven things. It's irresponsible. It's a startup, I said weakly. Risk is part of it. Yeah, but some people know when to quit, she replied, and that some people hung between us. I tried to hold on. We went to couples therapy once. She spent the entire session describing her frustration with my lack of follow-through and financial instability, and barely mentioned the way she stayed at work late with Drew because clients demanded it. When the therapist asked her what she was afraid of, Rachel said, ending up with someone who never becomes who he could be. I sat there, feeling stripped and small. The end, when it came, was both sudden and a long time coming. I came over to her place on a Saturday with a cheap bottle of wine and a printed mock-up of a new dashboard design I was excited about. The door was unlocked, which was weird. I walked in and found her in the living room with a suitcase by the couch. For a second, I thought she was going on a trip she'd forgotten to mention. Oh, she said, standing up, smoothing her dress. You're early. She didn't ask about the wine. She didn't ask about the printouts in my hand. She told me, in a voice so calm it didn't sound like her, that she had been thinking about our future and she just didn't see it anymore. She said she needed stability and someone who was already where she wanted to be. She said she couldn't keep waiting for my life to start. So you're breaking up with me, I said, because my brain needed it spelled out. She nodded, eyes dry. I'm sorry, she added, but it sounded like a line. I asked if there was someone else. She hesitated just a fraction too long. Daniel, that doesn't matter, she said, which was as good as a confession. I don't know how long I stood there, holding that stupid bottle of wine, watching the woman I'd planned my stupid future with talk about me like I was an investment that didn't mature in time. At some point, I put the bottle down, left the printouts on her coffee table, and walked out into the corridor. The elevator took forever. The whole world felt distant and underwater. I spiraled after that. One of our co-founders bailed. The funding dried up. Marco took a job at a bigger company to pay his own bills, apologizing like he was leaving me on a battlefield. I understood. I took on contract work again, swallowing my pride to build landing pages for people selling teeth whitening kits and dubious coaching packages. At night, the apartment felt louder. Every creak sounded like abandonment. I stalked Rachel's Instagram like a ghost. Within 2 months, there were photos of her at rooftop bars with Drew. 6 months later, a picture of them at a resort in Mexico, his arms around her, captioned, "Found my favorite view." The comments were full of heart emojis, and so happy for you, from people who had once sat at my kitchen table and eaten my overcooked pasta. I hit the lowest point a year after the breakup. I'd just gotten an email from a client canceling a project halfway through because priorities changed. I stared at my bank account and did the math on how many groceries I could buy that week. It wasn't enough. I remember sitting on the floor and thinking, Rachel was right. You're going to be stuck like this forever. Then something small happened that shouldn't have been a turning point, but somehow was. My older sister, Megan, came by with her kids. She took one look at me, at the mess, at the way I hadn't shaved in days, and just hugged me. No lecture. No, I told you so. I know you loved her, she said into my shoulder. But loving someone who thinks you're a failure doesn't mean you are one. She didn't see you. That doesn't mean there's nothing to see. Later that day, my nephew, who was 5 at the time, sat beside me while I half-heartedly tinkered with some code. What are you doing? He asked. Trying to fix something, I said. He watched me for a minute and then said, You're good at that. Like it was a fact, not a compliment. That weird little moment cracked something in me. I realized I'd outsourced my belief in myself entirely to a woman who had traded me for a better paycheck and a rooftop view. I wish I could say the healing was immediate. It wasn't. But from that day, I started making different choices. Not big dramatic ones. Small, boring ones. I made an actual budget. I started going to therapy on my own. I took a full-time job at a mid-level tech company instead of chasing the next vague, big idea without a safety net. It felt like admitting defeat at first. Then it felt like breathing. The next few years were unremarkable in the best possible way. I went to work, wrote code, shipped features, learned how to work on a team that didn't constantly feel like it was about to collapse. I wasn't building my own thing anymore, but I was building myself. I slept regular hours. I actually cooked food that didn't come in a cardboard box. Therapy peeled back layers. I didn't know I had my fear of failure, sure, but also the way I'd tied my worth to being chosen by someone like Rachel, someone shiny and impressive enough to make me feel like I mattered. My therapist, a woman in her 50s named Denise with a voice like warm tea, asked one question that stuck with me. When did you start believing that you were only valuable once you became something? I thought of Rachel, of the party, of the way she said, other guys your age, of my dad, who always talked about success like it was a destination with a gatekeeper. I realized I'd fallen in love with Rachel partly because she sounded like proof that I might get through that gate someday. Denise didn't trash Rachel. She didn't need to. She just kept bringing the focus back to me. What did I want my life to feel like? What did stability mean to me, not to someone scrolling through Instagram? Slowly, I let go of the idea that I had to become a headline to be worth loving. Career-wise, things picked up. Turned out, being the guy who overthinks everything and cares way too much about edge cases is actually useful in software engineering. I got promoted once, then again. I learned how to talk to clients without sweating through my shirt. I got invited to give a small talk at a local tech meetup about some niche problem we'd solved scaling our database. That talk changed things more than I expected. In the audience was this guy named Aaron who ran a small but fast-growing logistics company. Afterward, he pulled me aside and asked if I'd ever considered going back into startups. I laughed. I have considered never doing that again, I said. Fair, he said. But hear me out. He laid out a problem his company kept running into with tracking shipments and optimizing routes in real time. It was messy and boring and interesting in exactly the way my brain liked. He didn't promise me overnight riches. He talked about equity, long hours, risk, but also about doing it with a base salary that meant I wouldn't be betting my ability to eat on the project. It took me months to say yes. I talked it over with Denise, with Megan, with Marco who, by the way, had forgiven me for the chaos of our first attempt and was now doing well at a big firm. In the end, I realized I wasn't afraid of startups. I was afraid of tying my entire sense of self-worth to their success. If I could separate those, maybe it could work. So at 31, I joined Aaron and a small team as a co-founder and CTO of this unglamorous little logistics startup. We built slowly. No flashy launches. Just answering emails, tweaking algorithms, convincing small and mid-sized businesses to let us handle their chaos. We made mistakes, sure, but this time I had boundaries. I didn't work so much that my health crumbled. I didn't let my identity collapse when a feature flopped. I went home at night to an apartment that I liked and cooked myself dinner like an adult. Our first big break came when a regional retail chain agreed to use our platform across all their stores. The efficiency gains were real. Word spread in the weird small world of operations managers. Our user base grew. We got another round of funding bigger this time. We hired. I found myself leading a small dev team, mentoring junior engineers, feeling capable, solid. Around this time, my life started looking successful in the way people mean when they say it at parties. I upgraded my car not to anything insane, but to something that didn't rattle at red lights. I moved into a condo downtown that had actual furniture I hadn't rescued from the curb. A podcast interviewed me about resilience in tech, which I agreed to only because Aaron bribed me with barbecue. I dated here and there. Nothing super serious. I was cautious to the point of being unfair sometimes. If I felt even a hint of the old dynamic, someone more in love with my potential or my job than with me, I pulled back. A couple of women told me I seemed emotionally distant. They weren't wrong. I was still rebuilding trust, brick by brick. I didn't think about Rachel every day anymore, but she still showed up in my mind at weird times. When an investor shook my hand and called me impressive, a part of me wondered what she'd say if she heard it. When I scrolled past her Instagram, which I still hadn't unfollowed, I saw the photos of her and drew slowly dry up. Then came a long stretch of motivational quotes and selfies with captions about trusting the universe. Eventually, a picture of her with a friend in what looked like a lawyer's office, tagged, new chapters. I didn't reach out. I told myself I didn't care. Most days, that was true. Then came the night my phone buzzed at 11:43 p.m. with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd ignore unknown numbers that late, but I was still awake, debugging some weird timeout issue. I picked up. Hello. There was a pause. Then a familiar voice, slightly softer around the edges. Hey, Daniel. It's Rachel. I don't know how to explain what hearing her voice did to me. It was like someone opened a door I'd boarded up and forgotten the location of. I went very still. Rachel, I said carefully. Hi. I hope it's okay that I called, she rushed on. I saw an article about you. On LinkedIn. About your company? How one Austin startup is quietly revolutionizing regional logistics. She actually quoted the headline. Wow. You've really made it, huh? The absurdity of that sentence almost made me laugh. 7 years earlier, she'd looked me in the eye and told me she couldn't keep waiting for my life to start. Now I was apparently someone who had made it. I'm doing all right, I said. My voice sounded flat in my own ears. She started talking fast, the way she always did when she was nervous or selling something. She said she'd thought about me a lot. She said she was so proud of me, like she'd had any part in this version of my life. She casually dropped that things with Drew hadn't worked out, he'd cheated on her, if I read between the lines, and that she'd left the agency, pivoted, was doing freelance consulting now. There were hints, woven in, about how unstable freelancing could be, how lonely it felt not having someone to come home to. I listened. I made small noises of acknowledgement. Inside, though, it was weirdly quiet. I was waiting for the familiar tidal wave anger, longing, hurt. It didn't come. Instead, there was this distance. Not cold exactly, but clear. Like watching a play I'd already seen the ending of. I'd love to catch up, Rachel said at last. Like, really catch up. Maybe dinner? My treat this time, she added with a small laugh. I owe you that much. Old me would have jumped. Old me would have heard this as validation, as the universe finally admitting I'd been worth betting on. Old me would have rehearsed what to wear, what to say, how to prove just how much I'd changed. Current me sat there, looking around my quiet, actually clean apartment, at the sticky note on my monitor reminding me of tomorrow's stand-up, at the framed photograph of my nephew's soccer team on the shelf. I thought about the nights I'd spent convincing myself I was worthless because of the way her eyes narrowed when I talked about my dreams. I thought about Megan hugging me on that living room floor. I thought about Denise asking when I started believing I wasn't enough. Okay, I said eventually. We can meet up. Coffee, though? Not dinner. Somewhere public. I could hear the tiny hitch in her breath. Sure, she said quickly. Of course. Coffee. She suggested a CAF downtown. I countered with one closer to my office, neutral territory. We settled on Saturday. The morning of the meetup, I caught myself overthinking my outfit and laughed at myself. I wore what I'd planned to wear anyway, a plain t-shirt, jeans, and a jacket. Nothing that screamed anything. I didn't need to perform. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window. Time had done its thing, but gently. She still looked like Rachel, just slightly faded. A little more tired around the eyes. She stood when she saw me, that old smile flashing. Daniel, she said, stepping in like she was going to hug me. I half extended a hand instead. There was the briefest flash of confusion before she masked it. We got our drinks and sat. There were a few minutes of awkward small talk. Work, the city, the weather. I noticed how often she intertwined compliments about my success, with subtle digs at her own circumstances. I always knew you'd do something big, she said, stirring her latte. You were always so passionate. I'm honestly not surprised you're killing it. You didn't know that, I thought. You literally said you couldn't keep waiting for me to become someone. But I just said, thanks. She asked about the company, about our funding, our client list. Her eyes lit up at certain numbers. I could practically see her mental calculator whirring. At one point, she reached out and touched my arm, the way she used to when she wanted to steer a conversation. I'm really glad you didn't give up, she said, voice soft. I was worried back then that you'd, I don't know, get stuck. But look at you. I took a sip of my coffee to buy time. I did get stuck for a while, I said. Just, that part wasn't very Instagrammable. She winced, just a fraction. I was young, she said. We both were. I didn't know how to be supportive. I was under a lot of pressure, too. There it was. The rewrite. The gentle shifting of responsibility. Back then, I would have rushed to reassure her, to tell her I understood, to shoulder some of the blame. This time, I just let the silence stretch a few seconds longer than was comfortable. "I'm sorry," she said finally, the words sounding like they'd been dragged out. "For how things ended. I hurt you. I know that now." I believed that she was sorry, in whatever way she was capable of. But the interesting thing was, I didn't need the apology anymore. It was nice, in an abstract way, like finding a receipt for something you'd already returned years ago. "Yeah," I said quietly. "You did." She blinked, as if she hadn't expected me to agree so plainly. "I was scared," she rushed on, "of wasting my 20s, of ending up with nothing. You have to understand, my parents drilled into me that security was everything. When the startup wasn't taking off, I just panicked. And Drew was there." She looked at me with those green eyes, waiting for absolution. "I get being scared," I said. "I was terrified most of the time back then. But you didn't just leave, Rachel. You made me feel small for trying. You made me feel like I was a burden for not being there fast enough for you." She looked down at her hands. "I know," she whispered. "And I regret that. A lot." Then, softer, "I think about you all the time, you know." I didn't respond to that. The truth was, for years I had thought about her all the time. Now, not so much. She didn't know that, and I didn't need to tell her. Eventually, the conversation shifted. That's when I understood the full shape of why she was really there. "So, freelancing has been interesting," she said, forcing a laugh. "Clients can be flaky, you know? And with the economy being weird, it's hard to find consistency. I'm between apartments right now, staying with a friend for a bit." There it was. I could practically see the bridge she was trying to build between my steady gaze and her unstable ground. "I was thinking," she continued, fingers tracing the lid of her cup. "I have this idea for a brand consultancy, and with your connections now, maybe we could, I don't know, collaborate, or even just help each other out, like we used to talk about." She smiled, nostalgia dripping from the edges. "Remember? Power couple. If this had been a movie, that's where they would cut to a montage of past memories, us in my cramped old apartment, her curled up on the couch while I typed, us whispering plans about traveling, about success. The soundtrack would swell. The audience would wonder if this was the redemption arc sitting there." I did remember. I remembered the feel of her feet under my leg on the couch, the way she'd fallen asleep on my chest during thunderstorms, the way we used to joke about our future kids, inheriting my stubbornness in her eyes. Those memories were real. They weren't erased by what came after. But layered on top of them was the sick feeling in my stomach when she belittled my dreams in front of her friends. The way she made my lack of money a moral failing. The way she kissed another man at a party and then told me I was crazy for noticing. The way she'd left me holding a bottle of wine and my own broken sense of self-worth. All of that sat between us at that table, invisible but heavy. "I remember," I said. "We were good at making plans." She laughed, relieved, hearing what she wanted to hear. "Exactly. And look, you're in such a good place now, and I've grown so much, and maybe we could give it another shot. As older, wiser versions of ourselves." She tilted her head, giving me that intent look she used to deploy whenever she wanted something. "We had something real, Daniel. I know you felt it too. And now that you're established, we wouldn't have all that pressure. We could actually live the life we talked about." There it was, naked and obvious. "Now that you're successful, you're finally worthy of the future I wanted." Something inside me that had been waiting years for this moment just wasn't there anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't victorious. I was calm, detached, but not in a numbed-out way. More like I was standing on solid ground, watching someone try to sell me a ticket back into a burning building. "Rachel," I said slowly, "I'm glad you reached out. I'm glad you're okay. And I appreciate the apology." I took a breath. "But I don't want to get back together with you. Or collaborate. Or whatever version of that you're picturing." She blinked. Twice. What?" She let out a small, incredulous laugh. "You don't even want to think about it." "I've thought about it," I said. "For a long time. Back then, if you had come back a year after you left, I probably would have thrown myself at the chance. I would have done anything to prove I was worth choosing. But I'm not that guy anymore." Her jaw tightened. "So this is about punishing me," she said. "You want me to feel what you felt?" "No," I said, and it surprised me how much I meant it. "This isn't about punishment. I don't want you to hurt. I just finally love my life more than I miss you." Her eyes flashed. "Must be nice," she said, To sit there, all successful and put together, and pretend you're above it all. My chest tightened. I'm not above anything, I said quietly. You don't know what it took to get here, because you weren't there. You chose not to be. That's your right. But you don't get to come back now and skip the part where you watched me drown. That's not fair, she snapped. You make it sound like I just used you. I loved you. I believe you loved who I could be, I said. Not who I was. And I spent years trying to become someone who would finally be enough for you. Turns out, I had to stop doing that to become someone who's enough for myself. She looked like she'd been slapped. So that's it, she said, her voice sharpening. You're just done. Yes, I said. I'm done. A long silence stretched between us. I watched the thoughts flicker across her face, the charm recalibrating, the self-pity gearing up, the anger struggling not to show. Finally, she went for the old reliable card. I hit rock bottom after Drew, she said, voice lowering. I really did. He cheated on me with a 22-year-old intern, and then he fired me to avoid conflict. I had to move out of my apartment. I lost friends. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? I thought of you so many times. Wondered what you'd say, what you'd think. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said, and I meant it. Drew sounded like exactly the kind of guy who would do that. No one deserves that. She leaned forward, sensing an opening. You were always the kind one, she said. The solid one. I didn't see it then, but I do now. I made a mistake, Daniel. I picked wrong. Can't you just give us another chance? Maybe this is the universe's way of dash, Rachel. I interrupted, gently but firmly. You didn't pick wrong. You picked what you wanted at the time. Someone who already had the status and money you wanted. That was your choice. This, I gestured between us, is mine. She stared at me. For a moment, I saw the girl I'd met at that backyard party, the one who looked at me like I was interesting, like I could be something. Then I saw the woman who had told me, with cool certainty, that she couldn't keep waiting for my life to start. She came back when I became successful. I thought, hearing the sentence form naturally in my mind. But I wasn't the same man anymore. Out loud, I said, I hope you find what you're looking for. Truly. But it's not going to be with me. Her eyes filled with angry tears, she tried to blink away. Wow, she said, voice shaking. You really think you're better than me now, huh? I shook my head. No, I just finally think I'm enough. And that's not something I'm willing to hand back to the person who taught me to doubt it. The thing about karma is people imagine it as some dramatic event, car crashes, public humiliations, grand cosmic slaps. Sitting in that CAF, watching Rachel realize that the man she'd once deemed not good enough was calmly refusing her now, I understood that sometimes karma is quieter. It's a door left closed. It's a seat you don't offer at a table you built without them. We finished our coffee in brittle silence. She left first, saying something about being late to meet a client. I watched her walk away, that confident stride dulled ever so slightly. For a second, old instinct tugged at me go after her. Make it easier, soften the edges. I stayed seated. When I stepped outside, the air felt cool and clean. My phone buzzed with a Slack notification from my team about a test passing. I smiled, replied with a thumbs up, and started walking back to the office. The weeks after that meeting were stranger than I expected. I thought I'd feel triumphant, like I'd finally gotten payback. Instead, what I mostly felt was empty space where old pain used to be. Rachel texted me a couple more times. First a long message accusing me of kicking her when she was down. Then a shorter one, more vulnerable, saying she was really hurting and needed a friend. I showed both to Denise at our next session. You don't owe her access to you just because she's hurting, Denise said. Compassion doesn't require self-sacrifice. I ended up sending one clear, kind response. I told Rachel I was sorry she was going through a hard time and that I genuinely wished her well, but that continued contact wasn't healthy for me. I blocked her after that. Not out of anger. Out of self-preservation. Life kept moving. The startup hit new milestones. We landed a national client. Aaron and I clinked cheap beer bottles in the office kitchen and joked about being accidental adults. My nephew turned 8 and asked me to explain the blockchain for a school project, which was both flattering and deeply funny. On a random Tuesday, I ran into one of Rachel's old friends at the grocery store. She double-took when she saw me. Daniel? Oh my God, hey, I saw you in that article. You're like, fancy now, she joked. We caught up briefly near the cereal aisle. She mentioned, casually, that Rachel had moved to a smaller town to be closer to her parents for a bit. She's had a rough go, the friend said. But, choices. I nodded, feeling an odd mixture of sadness and relief. Choices. That was really what this all came down to. Hers. Mine. One night, a few months later, I was sitting on my balcony, scrolling my phone absent-mindedly, when a DM popped up on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. It was a girl in her early 20s, judging from the pictures, asking if I had any advice for getting into tech. She said she'd read the same article Rachel had and felt inspired. That word still sits weird on my skin, but I replied. I told her the stuff no one had told me. That it was okay to start late. That failure hurt, but wasn't fatal. That success didn't magically fix the parts of you that felt broken. After I sent it, I realized I was finally talking to the younger version of myself, too. The one who thought being chosen by the right woman, in the right dress at the right rooftop bar, would be the proof he wasn't a loser. I'm seeing someone now. Her name is Emily. We met at a volunteer event my company sponsored at a community center. She's a social worker, which means her job is about as far from glamorous as you can get, but I have never met someone more quietly impressive. On our second date, I told her about the startup, about the funding rounds, about the clients. She listened politely and then asked, "So what do you do for fun when you're not fixing other people's logistics problems?" The question floored me in a good way. It had been a long time since anyone seemed more interested in my inner life than my LinkedIn. With Emily, I'm different. Not because I'm performing a new role, but because I'm not performing at all. I told her, early on, about Rachel. Not every ugly detail, but enough. I told her I could get defensive when I felt compared to some invisible standard. I told her I might pull away if I felt like my worth was tied to my income. She nodded thoughtfully. "Thanks for telling me," she said. "If I ever make you feel that way, can you tell me instead of withdrawing? I don't want to use your soft spots against you." So far, she hasn't. When we split a bill, it's just that, a bill, not a scoreboard. When I talk about work, she asks how I feel about it, not just whether it's taking off. When she has a hard day, she doesn't blame me for not fixing it. We're both still learning, but it feels like we're on the same side of the table, looking at problems together instead of throwing them at each other. Sometimes, lying next to her in bed, listening to her breathe, I think about the version of me who once believed that if he could just become successful enough, he'd finally be safe from being left. I wish I could go back and sit with him on that apartment floor, take the wine bottle out of his hand, and show him this life. The quiet mornings, the boring meetings, the new love built on something as unremarkable and precious as mutual respect. I'd tell him, "She came back when you became successful, but by then you won't need her to tell you what you're worth." That's the real win. Not the car, not the condo, not the article. The fact that when the person who broke you most deeply shows up asking for a second chance, your first instinct won't be to ask, "Am I finally enough?" It'll be to ask, "Is this good for me?" If you're reading this and you're still in the storm with someone who makes you feel like a half-finished project they're getting impatient with, I am not going to pretend it's easy to leave, or easy to stay and demand better. Both hurt. Both will shake you. But one of them leads back to yourself. Karma isn't about making the other person suffer. That's just more time spent centering them.